Good evening, Patriots Nation. It's only May, but there's already a very clear picture forming around what the 2026 season could look like for the New England Patriots, and the early indicators bring a mix of opportunity and expectation that fans shouldn't ignore. The conversation right now is being driven by two major developments: the projected strength of schedule and a growing sense that the roster might not be done evolving yet, especially on the offensive side. Let's start with what we actually know. Based on early analysis, the Patriots are projected to have one of the more favorable schedules in the league once again, even after finishing as a first-place team in the AFC East, which normally comes with a tougher slate of opponents. The projections still place them around the middle to easier tier in terms of difficulty. That's significant because it follows a 2025 season where the team already benefited from the easiest schedule in the NFL. The narrative from critics was that last year's success was inflated by weak competition, but if the schedule remains favorable again, that argument starts to lose weight. At some point, you stop apologizing for who's on the schedule and start recognizing consistent winning. Looking deeper into the opponents, there's a clear contrast between home and away games. At home, the Patriots appear to be in a strong position. Matchups against division rivals like the Jets and Dolphins are already being viewed as favorable, and there's confidence that those games could once again tilt heavily in New England's favor. Add in teams like the Raiders, and uncertainty around opponents like the Vikings and Steelers, particularly at quarterback, and it creates a scenario where Gillette Stadium could become a major advantage. The expectation being built here is not just winning at home, but dominating. On the road, however, it's a different story. Trips to face teams like the Bears, Lions, Jaguars, Chargers, Seahawks, and Chiefs introduce a level of difficulty that can't be overlooked. There's an acknowledgement that while the Patriots were strong away from home last season, repeating that success won't be easy. Some of these matchups, especially against elite quarterbacks and playoff caliber teams, are likely to test the limits of this roster. That balance between a favorable home schedule and a challenging road slate is going to define the season. Now, when you combine that schedule outlook with the current roster, the expectations start to sharpen. The team is coming off a 14-3 season, but there's caution about assuming that level of success will repeat. A more realistic projection being discussed is around 10-11 wins, which still places the Patriots firmly in playoff contention. The foundation for that optimism is clear. Drake Maye at quarterback, a defense that retains key pieces like Christian Gonzalez, Marcus Jones, Carlton Davis, Christian Barmore, and Mill Williams, and overall continuity on that side of the ball. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the favorable schedule and a strong defensive core, there's a growing belief that the offense still lacks a true difference maker at wide receiver. The current group, featuring names like Romeo Doubs and Pop Douglas, is seen as solid but not elite. It's enough to win games, maybe even reach the playoffs, but when it comes to competing with the very best teams, that lack of a top-tier target becomes a real concern. That issue showed up late last season when defenses adjusted and there wasn't enough firepower to respond consistently, and that brings us to the developing situation that could change everything. There's increasing momentum behind the idea that a major move might be coming, specifically involving a high-profile wide receiver. The expectation being set is that this isn't just speculation anymore, but something that multiple voices around the league believe is trending toward becoming reality. The potential cost being discussed is significant, possibly involving a future first-round pick, but the reasoning is straightforward. If you're in a window to win now, especially with a quarterback on a rookie contract, you maximize that opportunity. So now the conversation shifts from what the Patriots have done to what they're willing to do next. A manageable schedule, a playoff caliber roster, and a potential blockbuster move on the horizon all point to a team that isn't satisfied with just being competitive. The goal is clearly bigger than that. But here's the real question for you. If this team is already in a position to win 10 or 11 games with the current setup, how aggressive should they be in pushing all their chips in to go even further? If you're sitting there thinking this team is already close, then the next step becomes pretty obvious, because this is where front offices separate themselves. It's one thing to build a playoff team, it's another to recognize the exact moment when you're one move away from becoming a true Super Bowl contender. And right now, everything around New England is pointing to that exact exact moment. The biggest factor driving that urgency is Drake Maye. When you have a quarterback playing at a high level on a rookie contract, that is your window. That is when you go all in, because once that extension hits, everything changes. Cap flexibility tightens, roster decisions get harder, and the margin for error disappears. So when you hear talk about potentially moving a future first-round pick, even something as far out as 2028, you start to understand the logic behind it. That pick realistically is likely to be late in the round if this team continues to perform. And late first-round picks, while valuable, don't always translate into immediate impact players. Now compare that to what a proven elite wide receiver brings to the table. We're talking about a player who can consistently create separation, stretch the field, win contested catches, and most importantly, take pressure off the rest of the offense. Because what we saw late last season was a unit that could move the ball, but struggled when defenses tightened up. When opponents started doubling the primary target and forcing the ball elsewhere, the offense lost rhythm. That's the difference between a good offense and a championship level one. And imagine this for a second. You pair that kind of receiver with Drake Maye, who already showed he can push the ball downfield and make plays under pressure. Suddenly, defenses can't just stack the box or sit on short routes. You open up the entire playbook. You create space for the run game. You give your quarterback a safety valve and a deep threat all in one. That changes everything about how this team operates. At the same time, you're not sacrificing your identity. The defense remains the backbone of this team. You still have a core that can shut down opposing offenses, generate pressure, and force turnovers. That balance is what makes the situation so dangerous for the rest of the league. If the offense takes even a moderate step forward, this team becomes incredibly difficult to beat, especially in a playoff setting where matchups and game planning matter even more. But let's not ignore the risks here. Giving up a first-round pick is never a small decision. You're betting on the present over the future. You're assuming that the player you bring in will stay healthy, perform at a high level, and fit within the system. And you're also betting that the team is close enough that this move actually puts you over the top. If that assumption is wrong, you could be looking at a missed opportunity to add young, cost-controlled talent down the line. Still, the tone around this situation suggests that the Patriots are leaning toward being aggressive. The pieces are there, the timing makes sense, and the messaging coming out points to confidence that this isn't just a possibility, but something that could realistically come together in the near future. Early June is being circled as a key moment, and if that deal gets finalized, it instantly becomes one of the defining moves of the offseason. So now you're looking at a team with a favorable schedule, a strong defense, a promising young quarterback, and potentially a true number one receiver joining the mix. That's not just a playoff team anymore. That's a team that can realistically start thinking about making a deep run and competing with the top contenders in the league. And if that happens, everything changes about how we talk about the 2026 season. It's no longer about building or developing. It's about expectations. It's about results. It's about whether this group can take advantage of the moment in front of them. And if you're leaning toward calling them a real contender, then the next layer of this conversation becomes even more important, because now it's not just about adding talent. It's about how everything fits together when the pressure is at its highest. Think about how this team would be built if that move actually gets completed. You'd have a quarterback in Drake Maye who is no longer just a promising young player, but someone expected to take control of big moments. You'd have a defense that already proved it can carry games, with continuity and chemistry still intact. And then you'd be inserting a true number one option into an offense that up to this point has been missing that final piece. On paper, that's the kind of structure you see from teams that don't just make the playoffs, but make noise once they get there. But the reality is, once you cross into that territory, expectations change instantly. Nobody is going to care that the schedule looked favorable back in May. Nobody is going to give extra credit for development or potential. It becomes about execution in critical moments. Third downs, red zone efficiency, late game drives, situational defense. Those are the details that separate a 10 or 11 win team from one that's playing deep into January. And that's where the internal growth of this roster becomes just as important as any external addition. Because even with a major upgrade at wide receiver, there are still questions that have to be answered over the course of the season. Can the offensive line hold up consistently against elite pass rushes, especially in those tough road environments? Can the coaching staff adjust when defenses inevitably try to take away that new top target? And maybe most importantly, how does Drake Maye respond when teams start game planning specifically to stop him? These aren't concerns in a negative sense. They're just the natural evolution of a team moving into contender status. Every strong team goes through this phase where they have to prove they can handle being the hunted instead of the hunter. Last season, there was an element of surprise. This year, if everything comes together, there won't be any surprises left. Every opponent will be prepared, every weakness will be targeted, and every game will carry more weight. That's why those early matchups, especially at home, could end up being more important than they seem right now. Building momentum, protecting home field, and establishing confidence early in the season can set the tone for everything that follows. Because once you get into that tougher stretch of road games, you don't want to be a team trying to figure things out on the fly. You want to already know who you are. And let's go back to the bigger picture for a second, because this is really what makes this entire situation so compelling. You have alignment, the timeline of the quarterback, the strength of the defense, the flexibility to make a big move, and a schedule that, while not the easiest in the league, still gives you opportunities to stack wins. That combination doesn't come around every year. In fact, it's rare. So when you look at it through that lens, the aggressive approach starts to make even more sense. It's not just about adding a player, it's about maximizing a window that might only stay open for a short period of time. And if you get it right, you're not just talking about a good season, you're talking about a potential turning point for the entire franchise moving forward. Now it all comes down to execution. If the move happens, if the roster performs the way it's expected to, and if the team can handle the increased pressure, then this could be one of those seasons that fans look back on as the start of something special. But if things don't click the way they're supposed to, then all of a sudden the questions get louder, especially when you've invested future assets to try and win now. That's the gamble. That's the reality of where the Patriots are right now. So as we wait for everything to unfold, from the official schedule release to any potential blockbuster moves, one thing is clear: this team is right on the edge of something bigger. The foundation is there, the opportunity is there, and now it's about whether they can take that final step. And as this continues to unfold, there's one more layer that fans need to keep in mind, because everything we've talked about so far, schedule, roster, potential trades, it all leads into one defining factor that can't be predicted on paper: how this team handles expectation over time. Because it's one thing to start a season strong, it's another to sustain that level when every opponent starts circling your name on the calendar. If the Patriots come out and take care of business early at home like expected, stack wins against division rivals, and build that momentum, the narrative around this team is going to shift very quickly. What started as a team with a favorable schedule becomes a team that should be competing for the top seed. And once that conversation begins, the margin for error gets even smaller. Every loss becomes magnified, every offensive stall gets questioned, every defensive breakdown becomes a talking point. That's where leadership inside the locker room becomes critical, not just from the coaching staff, but from the players who have been through those moments before. Because when you're trying to turn a strong roster into a championship caliber team, talent alone isn't enough. You need composure, you need discipline, you need the ability to respond when things don't go your way. And this is where the balance of this roster could really define the season. On one side, you have youth and upside, especially with Maye continuing to develop and take on more responsibility. On the other side, you have a defense anchored by players who understand what it takes to win at a high level. If those two sides sync up at the right time, that's when you start to see complete performances, the kind that travel well, even in those difficult road environments we talked about earlier. Now bring it back to that potential offensive addition again, because if that move does happen, it doesn't just improve production, it changes how defenses prepare, it forces adjustments, it creates mismatches, and over the course of a long season, those small advantages start to add up in a big way. Instead of grinding out every drive, you start to see explosive plays,